Hello there. The Wandering Worlds by Terry Greenhough. This was in pretty good condition when I first got it and started reading it. Not even a crease on the spine. It's been living in my backpack for the last, week or so. So it's not so great anymore, but still not too bad. So, from the back. A strange and vicious attack of mental energy is suddenly unleashed on the occupants of Explorer Globe 13 during a routine mission to find mineral wealth in a distant planetary system. Only Keek, the vessel's alien menial, remains unaffected. For the rest, it is just the beginning of a grim struggle for survival. What is the reason behind these terrifying attacks, and who is their invisible enemy? When Andre, the taciturn Frenchman, discovers the valuable gemstone Hyperbium? Could it be that he has found the key to the mystery of the Wandering Worlds? So it sounds exciting. A classic, fast-paced sci-fi adventure. And I bought it based on that. It was part of my 2023 massive November book haul when I managed to get a whole heap of books for $1 each. It ended up working well for both of us. I got heaps of books. They got nearly $200 off me, to be honest. So it sounded exciting. I knew nothing about this author. This author is an English author, it turns out. I think I might have had a vague notion that was the American editor who was very much part of the classic sci-fi. No, Terry Greenhough, if I'm pronouncing that right, I'm probably not, is an Englishman. He wrote science fiction. He seems to only have had about 4 novels, and he was born in 1944, which explains a lot. Now, from this exciting back cover description, which based on that and the rather beautiful cover, we all say we shouldn't judge books by their cover, but hey, sci-fi people do. So does everyone else. We just don't admit it that easily. And this cover, I want you to notice, you probably can't quite see it, but there on that rather pretty space shuttle is EG-13. So the person who painted the cover actually knew something about the book. Hooray. Such an exciting premise on the back, except that this book just really doesn't live up to that at all. It's not a lie. It's one of those blurbs on the back covers which you can't point to anything in them as an untruth. It's just that overall they give you a completely erroneous mental picture of what you're about to read. And this mental picture that it gave me was not great. So what is the plot according to Deb? Well, here we go. So the Wandering World starts on board the shuttle, this EG-13, and we find out that it's just suffered its first crippling alien mental attack, and they're recovering. Actually, some of them are recovering, some of them aren't. So it started out with the complement of Keek, as it mentioned on the back, is an alien menial on board. He strikes me as kind of reptilian. I'm not sure. He's described as having mental telepathy, empathy, as long as he's touching someone. There is our main narrator for a lot of it. What is his name? I don't even care what his name is anymore. Shannon, that's it, Van Shannon. He's not called the captain, he's called the integrator, and apparently he's this amazing U-Butte, fully trained sixth sense individual who can do all this amazing stuff, and that's why he's in charge. You've got an eye who once plugged into the machine sees space. You've got a feeler who puts his hands in gloves and can manipulate things. That's Andre, the taciturn Frenchman, by the way. And you've got an ear who plugged into the ship can hear space and stars whispering and all sorts of other freaky stuff. It's a great idea, to be honest. The concept is great. Eye, feeler, and ear all have a young, maybe they're a teenager, they're a young person who's an apprentice who's come along on this voyage to learn how to do it. Now, this shuttle belongs to a corporation that has sent it out to hunt for mineral wealth. So their prime goal is to search. It's on a preset orbit that it goes through. They've got very little mobility or control. They've got no weapons. They basically float from system to system, and they scan each of the worlds and moons for mineral wealth, or alien intelligence. At one point, Shannon goes through a monologue about how they're excited when mineral wealth is reported, less so when intelligence is reported. He's meant to be able to sense all this intelligence, by the way, because he's so amazing and sixth-sensed. Anyway, we start this book when the first attack has happened. The young female apprentice is unconscious. So is one of the other two male apprentices. The third one is intact. Everyone suffered, blah, blah, blah. Then we go through a lot of argy-bargy back and forth. Eventually there's more attacks incoming. The girl dies without ever having come out of coma. The third apprentice collapses and goes into coma. Eventually the second apprentice dies. I think the third one's still alive at the end of the book, or maybe he died. I can't remember that either. So they're going through space. Eventually they reach a particular planet. And the scout with Andre the Frenchman goes down to check it out. Comes back with these two crystals that he initially thinks are this hyperbium, this amazingly valuable and sought after mineral. Think diamond, like 100 years ago. Only these ones seem to be pulsing and alive. Everyone's still sure there's aliens out there, and next thing you know, you see a ship that's one of these space pirates. It's another mineral searching company, but they're apparently not as reputable as the company these guys belong to. More attacks follow, and eventually we reach the end. And even so, even saying that, I'm not going to reveal the end as such, if I even can. It sounds interesting. It sounds like an actual sci-fi plot from the back. It sounds like an actual sci-fi plot as I describe it. But reading it doesn't feel like that at all. First of all, these aliens that keep attacking. From the get-go, they're all talking about these alien attacks, but they don't know anything about aliens. They're attacking like this. They don't know any aliens that can. They haven't seen any aliens. They've got no evidence of aliens at all. So there's a lot of assumptions piling up there. Not a single one of these assumptions involves Occam's razor. No one on board this ship has heard of Occam or his razor. And it's all very, very unlikely, the way they all just assume these things, and they all assume them together, and they never seem to talk about their assumptions. That all of a sudden everyone on board thinks it's an alien, but no one's actually discussed it that we can tell. Anyway, so Greenhough was an English author, born 1945, explains a lot. Goodreads is a bit of a mainstay for me. When I went to Goodreads with this, this book has only been included on 20 shelves, and only 4 or 5 people have reviewed it. Again, that's saying a lot, because a book like this from the 70s, and this one was copyright in 1976 by Greenhough, a book like this should have a little bit more recognition as classic science fiction is rising in fame, as it were, but it doesn't. So it was slow and laborious to read. That's probably why not many people have read and reviewed it. The experience is just not great. The central theme, the title, these wandering worlds of the title, they're not even mentioned until the last 20 pages or so. And by then you're kind of over it, to be honest. I was anyway. Now, I'm not saying that this author couldn't write. He probably could. I think he had a lot of literary skills, but his prose is incredibly florid, extravagant, purple, grandstandy, boring. Yeah, I was bored. I was bored for a lot of this book that should have been fascinating. I could manage a page at times, maybe just a paragraph or two, and my brain wandered off to more interesting things like, I don't know, sweeping the floor or something. Anything was more interesting than having to deal with more of this prose. So the main character, especially our not captain, integrator, sixth sense, amazing man, Van Shannon, spends the whole time posturing in purple prose. And if that isn't a phrase, it is now. And he isn't convincing as a captain, and he isn't convincing as an integrator. He is not so convincing as a superior human of any kind. He is just barely adequate as human. He isn't smart. He's socially inadequate. He's icky, to be honest. There's a lot of ick here. From what we see of Van, he would be psyched out of any test for anything more elaborate than window cleaner, I suspect. So of the 172 pages that we have in total, possibly less than 20 of them actually have anything to do with the promised plot. Now that might be a mild exaggeration, but trust me, it's not a huge exaggeration. We get only a bit of hazy plot in the last 10 pages. So what do we get for the majority of this? What we get for the majority of this is the different characters agonizing inside their own heads about their own histories, their own imaginations, in the most tedious, repetitive detail you can imagine. Because almost all of this narrative happens inside a few people's heads, 3 or 4, italics are sometimes used to explain when they're inside their head, but other times they're not used and people keep on thinking inside their head. Occasionally, you'll have one person's internal monologue go on for a couple of pages, and then it'll suddenly become someone else's internal monologue without warning you. So Ruth monologues for a while about her belief in God. Terry Greenhough seems to have been really, really concerned with whether God is or isn't real, and whether faith in him is justified or not, I've got to say. So she monologues for a while, then all of a sudden she's thinking these strange things that don't fit her character as we know it, and then I realise we've swapped to Jocelyn's monologuing without any warning at all. On page 94, Van Channing is monologuing about something or other, and he thinks, where is this? It either made perfect sense or no sense at all. He couldn't decide which, and I couldn't decide which either. Throughout this book, none of it made sense most of the time. On average, each page of this book, and I know this because towards the end I was so bored, I was opening this at random and counting the number of question marks and exclamation marks per page. On average, every page had 5 question marks. One later on has a magnificent 13 question marks. And none of these questions come from dialogue. They come from internal monologue. Now, towards the end, we swap down a little bit from the question marks to exclamation marks. If you took out all the question marks and all the exclamation marks, I think we could save at least a dozen pages in here. Now, if this had been fast actioned, I could have gotten on with the social ickness. I'm not terribly critical of older writers whose books reflect the era in which they lived and wrote. Greenhough was from 1944, so you would expect a certain level of social difference to now. Some authors wrote magnificently ahead of their time, many of them didn't. But because Greenhough's writing was so infinitesimally detailed and boring, I had time to get icked by his characters. So of the 4 human adult characters on board, 2 are male and 2 are female. We get a brief rundown of the ship. Apparently there's 2 dorms, a female dorm, a male dorm, there's a kitchen, there's a small rec room, and then there's the main control area. None of it is well described. We just know they exist. So of the 2 females, one, Ruth, is horrible and everyone hates her. Why? It seems to be mainly because she's old, ugly, and fat. Now, she doesn't seem a particularly nice person. She seems a bit brusque, but she also seems like she's been bullied by everyone on board for the last few months. So under the circumstances, I wouldn't expect her to be particularly friendly. We find out that she'd been earlier on suicidal, and she'd come back from that by believing in God, retraining to become an eye, And her personal experience on board the ship that keeps her going is reading poetry, which doesn't fit in with the horrible character that everyone's describing. Even the alien reptile hates her and is nasty to her most of the time. So she reads Keats for entertainment, and her joy is on duty to gaze out into the void in which she sees God. It seems to me like a fairly innocent recreation, but the rest of the crew loathe her, and our not captain integrator turns off the screen for her whenever he can, for no particular reason other than to make her miserable. So, Terry, I don't know what you thought you were doing with Ruth. I kept expecting it all to turn around with her at the end, but no. She is a horrible person that everyone hates right to the end because she's ugly and believes in God. Tell you what, I've got issues. Now, the other female, however, is Jocelyn. She is young and beautiful, and everyone absolutely adores her. Because, primarily, as far as I can tell, she's young and beautiful. Again, Terry, you got issues, and I've got issues with you. Now, Jocelyn is blind, which apparently helps her in some way being the ear that hears planets moving through the universe, or whatever she's meant to hear. The reptilian alien Keek especially adores her and spends his whole time with his hand on her leg, talking to her inside their head, sometimes in italics, sometimes not, but as repetitiously as everyone else is inside their head. The author seems really enraptured by the fact that when Jocelyn went blind, her tear duct stopped working. So she spends a lot of her time crying without tears, or silently crying without the release of tears. This Jocelyn is seriously a wet dish rag, and the adoration she inspires in all the males around her, human and otherwise, appears to be largely because she's pretty, to offset Ruth being ugly and everyone hates her. You can kind of see why it's only got 4 or 5 reviews there, can't you? Now, the 3 trainees are an unpleasant reinforcement of this weird gender issue that Terry Greenhough has. So, the young man who dies gets unceremoniously dumped out into space, or his corpse does, but when the young girl dies, they all get fully sentimental and how beautiful she was, and her parents waiting for her back home and she will never return, so they put her body in the freezer to take home to her grieving parents. But the young guy can just go fish. I don't know. The social stuff was icky, and I would not have minded if there was adventure and something else to take my mind off the ick, but there really wasn't. Now, moving on to page 154. This is the page with 13 question marks. And I'm going to read you a bit, because I read through it, so why shouldn't you? Gradually his mind was swerving toward Keek's view that simple gravity was the culprit, not the aliens. Simple, italicized, simple, question mark, Christ, sentence mark, sick for home, alien corn, question mark. Yes, I'm sick for it too, except I haven't got one, statement mark, but, and then we lose the italics for some reason. But even though he almost agreed with Keek, he didn't like to because it meant admitting a certain amount of cold fact hid inside a legend, that of the wandering worlds, which we hadn't heard about until then. I don't know. I felt this was a hot mess. I don't think that Terry Greenhough can't write, but I do think he needed a serious editor who needed to make him step down from that question mark, actually have plot, a little bit of dialogue, and maybe a little bit less purple prose, or maybe just not everyone inside their head the whole time. And the way Keek could touch Jocelyn, and did most of the time, and then she knew what he was thinking and he knew what she was thinking, and then he'd touch someone else and the 3 of them would be in some sort of weird mental communication blocking out the other ones, which they did so that they could call Ruth the ugly witch or the old witch or the nasty gargoyle or whatever else they wanted to call her without her actually hearing. You know what? If you're saying shitty things about things, people, they know. They may not be able to hear, they can know. So yeah, seriously issues with this. Now, after about this much of the book, them raving on about aliens that we haven't seen and we don't have any evidence for, and we've got these mental attacks that may or may not have something to do with the crystals that Andre found on a world and brought back, that may or may not be hyperbium, whatever, and that may or may not be alive, or there may be aliens talking through the crystal or whatever. Right at the end, Keek the reptile menial dishwasher takes control because Van is too evolved and he's been knocked out by the alien attack. Finally, we get some evidence that there actually are aliens, but that evidence is the last 10 pages of Keek mentally communicating with the crystals and hearing the whole history of these aliens that actually need the crystals or are the crystals. And the prose went from purple to rainbow purple. It's like every shade of purple and lavender with sparkles on top, and I just could not abide it. After having sat through almost the whole book, finally the last few pages, I was done. One night I was so phased out by all the purple maunderings about inside their head, and I actually went and read Canterbury Tales for a while because it had more happening in it than this did. So, very sad and frustrating. I found this a very frustrating book because there was so much about it that should have been likable. Kind of a part of me wants to sit down and rewrite this only from Ruth's point of view, without making her an evil, ugly witch, blamed for being fat and believing in God or whatever. Mind you, the Keek believes in God, not just one God, many gods. He apparently saves Jocelyn from coma by mind linking with her and Andre and getting his race's love goddess to fight with the hate god inside Jocelyn's head or something. I was done by then. I'm keeping this book. One day I might reread it. It might be me. I don't think it's me. I think it's him. I don't think it's me. But I'm keeping this book. Like Garbage World by Platt, it bugs me how bad it feels. It bugs me how little I enjoyed it. I feel like there has to be more there that I'm not getting. Now, if you're one of the 4 or 5 people in the whole world who's actually read this book, I would love to chat to you about this. If you're not, my recommendation is maybe skip it. Maybe go on to something more comprehensible, like Philip K. Dick or Jose Farmer, when they're off on an acid dream, make more sense than this guy. Anyway, thanks for listening to me rant and rave about yet another science fiction book that I didn't love as much as I feel I should have. Just look at that amazing cover. Have I mentioned how much I love that cover? That makes the inside of it ever so much more disappointing. Thank you for watching. Read good books, not necessarily this one. There are many good books, not this one. This is not a good book. Either it's not a good book or I'm not you read good books. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.